Hey there everyone, it's JC. Welcome back to my channel. I wanted to make a card for an upcoming event that I'm going to at the end of September. So what I'm going to first start with is my 7.5 inch square sticky mat grid on top of my all too new crafting mat. And onto this mat, I'm going to adhere a 4.25 by 5.5 inch Nina Solar White 110 pound cardstock panel. I want to create a soft pink gradient starting from the top of my panel, working my way down. So I'm going to start with all too new's Cotton Candy Fresh Dye ink and a large ink blending brush, and work this color from the top about 2/3 of the way from the bottom of the cardstock panel. Once I feel I have a fairly smooth blend of this color, I'm going to move down to baby pink. The first color I used was a little warm, so I wanted to introduce a little bit more pink and some cooler tones, so I thought baby pink would be perfect for the top third of this card. After ink blending on the panel, I'm going to bring in my original stamp wheel. And in my stamp wheel, I have my slim grip mat to hold down my cardstock panel, my ink blended cardstock panel. And on this cardstock panel, I'm going to use the Splatter texture background stamp. This is a Kristina Werner with Concord and 9th background stamp. And I want the splatter to cascade from the top of the card down to the bottom, so the more concentrated image is toward the top where I ink blended baby pink. And once I have that image centered on my stamp wheel and on top of my panel, I'll use the All Too New Stamp Conditioning Eraser just to ensure that I have a smooth application of the ink that I decide to apply. And the ink I'll be using is Blush Rose Fresh Dye ink, and I'll carefully ink up the image, applying quite a heavy layer of this color on top of my ink blended panel. I chose this really interesting background because I knew that my foreground elements were also going to act as my sentiment, so I felt like this gave the background a perfect opportunity to really shine through. I'll let my background panel ink dry back, and then I'll start working on my foreground elements to this card. Again, my foreground elements and sentiment elements are going to be one and the same on this card. And to make my sentiment pieces and my foreground pieces, I'm starting with a panel of Frosty Pink Crafter's Essential Cardstock. And onto this panel, I'm using little star stamps and the solid Oh Baby sentiment. And I'll position this image on an open area of this scrap piece of cardstock. To mimic the gradient that I have on my background, I'm using Fuchsia Fresh Dye ink to ink up the bottom 2/3 or half of the Oh Baby sentiment. And then once I have a solid impression of that color, I'll move on to baby pink and ink up the entire sentiment just to fill in the rest of this solid piece. These large solid sentiments give you an opportunity to really experiment with different colors and also bring a lot of interest by doing this gradient stamping technique. I'll set that sentiment piece aside and bring in another cardstock scrap. This is Puffy Heart Crafter's Essential Cardstock, and I'll grab the thinner font baby sentiment and position the sentiment on an open space of my scrap panel. And onto this, I'm going to use Jazzberry Fresh Dye ink, and I'll use a solid impression of this ink instead of creating a gradient this time. These nice thin letters are great for solid impressions. And really, I just want to balance out the foreground and background elements by stamping this solid sentiment. To pair with the little star stamps from Kristina Werner, there is a coordinating die set, the Little Star die set. And in this die set is the die that cuts out the larger bold baby sentiment, as well as the offset outline to the Oh Baby sentiment. So I'll use my electronic die cutting machine to cut out both of these sentiments, and off camera I cut 2 layers of this sentiment as well. I just wanted to give my sentiment pieces a little bit more structure since they are my foreground element and also my focal element, as I've been mentioning. On my Spellbinders tray, you'll also notice that I've die cut the offset and outline image to the onesie. I cut the backing image from white cardstock, and then the outline onesie images from Pink Diamond Crafter's Essential Cardstock from All Too New. And all I'm going to do is glue and layer up these images that I've die cut as well as stamped. So again, I've got 2 layers of the Oh Baby sentiment and then 2 layers of the baby sentiment, just so that the sentiment feels a little bit more grounded and sturdy on my background. And after gluing down my sentiment pieces, I'll do the same for the outline images for the onesie. Using my favorite liquid adhesive, I'll just trace the outline and stack these 3 layers that I die cut. I anticipate a lot of dimension on this card, so I thought stacking these little outline onesie images would also give some interesting tactile texture to this card. So then after stacking all of those outlines, then I can center that on top of the white offset white background for the onesie image. And those are all of my finished foreground elements. So I'll set that off to the side and then glue down my background panel to a folded note card base before I start moving forward to assembling the rest of this card, just so that I can ensure that my sentiment is perfectly horizontal on my background. I'm using the sticky mat grid just to make sure my background panel doesn't move as I'm gluing down my sentiments. And to help get this perfectly horizontal on my background, I'm using a Simon Says Stamp T-square to help just create a nice little base edge for me to glue everything down. I'm using a variety of foam squares, foam tape that I have in my stash. I'm not quite sure where these foam squares came from. I think they're from Spellbinders. I just really didn't feel like cutting little pieces with foam tape, so these squares were perfect for me. But then on the more solid Oh Baby sentiment, I used foam tape from Altenew. This is the 1/2 inch wide by 1/16 inch thick Altenew foam tape, and I'll position that above the baby so that it says Oh Baby Baby. And then where that open area is on my background, I'll just directly glue down the pink onesie. And then while this background panel is drying, as well as my foreground elements, I'll adhere and embellish this card with Altenew Stellar Sequins. This is Twinkling Pink. I thought this color pink perfectly complemented the background panel and the color palette that I have going on this card. And it's so easy to pick up and grab these sequins by using the wax tip in my Altenew Perfect Picker. And then I'll position them and make sure they're perfectly adhered using my Crafter's Essential micro tip tweezers from Altenew as well. And that's really it. Making this card was so easy with Kristina Werner's collection. This one's a little bit older. It's not a recent release, but it's recent as of this year. I'll definitely be holding on to the stamp set and die set. Kristina also's got other great items that look similar to this one for many different occasions. In fact, I still have one of the first ones for a more holiday themed card, and I'm getting ready to break that out pretty soon here. Anyway, thank you so much for coming back to my channel. I've been trying to post more content here as of recently. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of my live events or any of my pre-recorded card making video tutorials. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.